Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're at Hemingway's in Nairobi. Behind me are the famous Gong Hills that Karen Blixen wrote about. And it's a real pleasure to be interviewing the president of Columbia University, Lee Bollinger. And that is just one element of what is a really gilt-edged CV. And it's a pleasure to be speaking with him today. I hope you enjoyed today's interview from Nairobi. Lee C. Bollinger became Columbia's University's 19th president in 2002. Columbia stands at the very top rank of great research universities. President Bollinger is Columbia's first Seth professor of the university, a member of the Columbia Law School faculty, and one of the country's foremost First Amendment scholars. His publications have placed Bollinger at the center of public discussion about the importance of global free speech to continued social progress. His next book, by the way, The Free Speech Century, and some of us might wonder if it is a free speech century, will be published in fall of 2018. President Bollinger is a fellow of both the American Academy of Arts and the American Philosophical Society. He's widely published on legal and constitutional issues, free speech, the press. His books include The Free Speech Century, Uninhibited, Robust, Wide Open, A Free Press for a New Century, Eternally Vigilant, Free Speech in the Modern Era, Images of a Free Press, The Tolerant Society, Freedom of Speech, and Extremist Speech in America. He's received the National Humanitarian Award from the National Conference for Community and Justice and the National Equal Justice Award from the NAACP. Bollinger is a director, listen to this, of Graham Holdings, formerly the Washington Post Company, and serves as a member of the Pulitzer Prize Board. He was, interestingly, and I didn't touch on this in the interview, a director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where he also served as chair from 2010 to 2012. Born in Santa Rosa, California, raised there and in Baker, Oregon. He's married to the artist Jean Bollinger, and they have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Pleasure to be speaking to him today. President Bollinger, I was reading through your resume and it's almost as bubbly as the champagne. Thank you for making the time today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing here in Nairobi?
Columbia University has a set of global centers. There are 9 around the world. And these centers are intended to try to help faculty and students at Columbia become more engaged with the world, more aware of the world, so that the scholarly research educational mission of the university can be better in the modern contemporary sense. I think I came to the view some years ago that American universities needed to adjust the intellectual framework of the questions we ask, the things that we think are important. The world had changed dramatically in the past 10, 20 years, and universities change very slowly, and we needed to try to get out in the world more to see what the important issues were so that we can teach students and do research. To do that, you really need to have actual places in the world where you have very, very sophisticated people who can help you, help faculty, help students. And we have now done that, and we have, as I said, 9 global centers, and one of them is in Nairobi, and I'm here to visit that center.
And you were describing it as something for your students, so they're actually coming here and visiting Nairobi.
Yes, that's right, and our faculty, and we also at Columbia are really intent on trying to figure out ways to work with outside partners, governments or business or NGOs, other educational institutions, on real practical problems. And we're not interested in kind of endless work on these, but really trying to solve some problems where academic work is important, but you have outside partners who can really do things. So the very practical orientation of the university, along with the deep intellectual scholarship that we are known for and very good at, benefits also from having an office such as we have here, with a very sophisticated director under wonderful leadership, and to help our faculty and students to engage with the world. This is not, it's helpful to sort of understand this by pointing out what it is not. And what it is not is a branch campus. So we don't have a separate faculty, we don't have a separate student body. That is the strategy of a number of American universities, but that's not what we've done. This is more to help our faculty and our students become more sophisticated about the world, and therefore to have Columbia perform its mission better than it otherwise might.
You know, I've come across Columbia. There's been a lot of excellent literature about journalism. I noticed that this is one of your passions.
Yes, right.
You've written a number of books about that. Is the law component also part of Columbia as well? Or
oh, yes.
Yes. So the law faculty is something that I've known of. Yes. Are these the two big strands, or am I looking at it too narrowly?
There are many strengths of the university. I mean, it's really one of the, as you of course know, one of the great universities of the world. But everything is great, from the 18-year-old students who come onto our campus every year to the international students who come to the medical school, to the journalism school, to the every school. I shouldn't leave any out. It's a really fantastic institution.
So you're talking about, you know, this philosophical idea of, you know, the globalized world, of increasing the sophistication of your students. But if we look at the contemporary world right now, I mean, we've got the US shut down because President Trump wants to build a wall. We've been seeing this extraordinary new trajectory of fake news and demeaning journalism. How do you, as somebody right at the center, you know, of this space, what's your perspective of what you're seeing at the moment? Right.
So I think one has to start by one of the wonderful things of being an academic is that you can take a longer term perspective. And in my lifetime, just take your lifetime, the last 10, 20 years, we have gone from a world in which everything about globalization seemed to be great and everybody was talking about its wonders. Same thing is true of the internet. You know, it was going to bring democracy to every place, and it was going to provide the perfect marketplace of ideas. So we've gone from a world in which we idealize globalization, which is a very real phenomenon, and we idealize the internet and everything that it can do.
It was going to be a flat world.
Exactly, exactly. We've gone from that world to one which is now, the general view is that globalization is terrible and costly and so on, needs to be reversed, and the internet is dangerous to democracy and a threat to the things we value. So my view is that neither is right. You know, the internet is in many ways a wonderful addition to the capacity of people to understand knowledge and to discuss issues and communicate. Globalization, which is made up of the internet, I mean, not made up of, but it's deeply affected by the internet, the economic integration of the world, the ease with which people move around the world now, and the needs of people to move around the world. All of these things are very real, have many very positive consequences and very many negative consequences. In the modern world we live in, we have to figure out the benefits, and we have to try to moderate the costs of these. How we do that will obviously determine the fate of the world for the rest of our lives and the future. A great university says those are the great issues of the time. They will continue to be the great issues. And we really must engage with them as scholars and as teachers. And we have certain things that we bring to bear on these issues. A scholarly kind of temperament, the capacity to dig into things deeply, to reflect, to do it according to scholarly standards. And we should be engaged with those. So going back to the global centers, and that's what we are trying to do.
So just extrapolating on a couple of points which have been front and center, in terms of the internet, it was seen, during the Arab Spring, that when individuals were able to organize themselves, it was seen as a very liberating force. But if you look at it today, some states have turned it completely on its head. Some people talk of a digital panopticon in places like China. A lot of people felt there was some degree of intervention in the US election using these Uber platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Do you feel that that trend change is accurate? Am I describing something accurately, or?
Well, I think you are describing something very accurately. But from my point of view as a free speech, free press expert.
Are we still free?
Yes. So my
what about you? When I was reading your resume here, it mentioned that you were at the Washington Post in a very senior capacity, and of course we've had this situation with one of the writers there. I mean, that was quite somebody, okay, not an American citizen, but somebody writing for an American newspaper, killed in a foreign country. How do you read this from where you're sitting?
A horrific act, and deeply threatening to a free press everywhere. So I think we need to step back. What you identified as the problems of the internet, the capacity of evil forces and authoritarian forces to use it to achieve their purposes, absolutely right. It is also true that every time you open up a society in terms of free speech, you are making it possible for people with very bad ideas to advance those ideas. I mean, that's almost by definition what it means to live in an open society. There are good ideas, there are bad ideas, there are virtuous ideas, there are evil ideas. And the theory that we have come to over time, certainly in the United States in the last 100 years, is that allowing the free expression of ideas of all kinds and the opportunity to rebut bad ideas, to counter them, to advance good ideas, is a better way to structure a society than the opposite, trying to control ideas, make sure the bad ideas don't have any traction. That approach is not going to work as well over the long term as the open approach. That's the theory of the First Amendment. That's the theory of an open society. When the internet comes in, it's a new technology of communication. That clearly does the same thing. Good ideas have the opportunity to spread, but bad ideas too. I think the question we're facing now, and it's a serious one, is with this new technology, are the spread of evil kind of ideas and bad ideas, is that happening in a form, in a degree, that means we should have a different response to that problem than we have had before the internet?
What do you think?
So what I think is that we don't know enough yet. In all honesty, I think we are just at the beginning of trying to grapple with this new extremely powerful technology of communication. And we need more research on this. We need more understanding. We need to understand and see how the companies will respond. We need to consider public policies and what they will be. If you go back a little less than 100 years, a new technology of communication came in then, broadcasting, what we are doing right now. Many people feared broadcasting, radio and TV. And it was used for really bad purposes, nefarious purposes, to spread hate, to spread discrimination, and so on. But it was also used for fantastic purposes of opening up societies and making it possible for people to find out news and information, entertainment. We invented in the United States a kind of way of dealing with that, which is very complicated, but there is a government agency that is charged with regulating broadcasting. It cannot do that with newspapers. 400 years before that, people were afraid of print and had to adjust to that. That's where we are now with the internet. We are at the beginning and we have to figure out really how to deal with this. It's one of the most fascinating questions of the time, in my view. I'm spending a good part of my life trying to answer those questions.
Yeah. I see you're also passionate about architecture. And I was wondering, you know, what you feel about modern architecture. This, I see I think you commissioned a building by Renzo Piano.
Yeah, more than building, yeah.
Yeah.
For the first, it's been 100 years since Columbia developed a new campus. And of course, to think about a new campus in New York City for a university is not something you do every few years or decades. It's, and so I proposed that Columbia needed new space, but also needed to be able to think out over many decades. And we set off on the mission of developing a new campus in West Harlem. That was approved after 6 years of work. It is now underway, and the first 3 buildings have opened, all designed by Renzo Piano, and I hired him as the master architect or designer for the whole campus. They are sensational buildings. If you come onto the Morningside Heights campus in New York City at Columbia, it is one of the great academic centers in the world. You instantly feel your IQ go up 20 points when you walk on the campus. We had to figure out with Renzo what a modern university would look like. It can't look like the glorious one on Morningside Heights. It's just not our sensibilities. It has to be more open, more welcoming to the communities, more light. And we set off to do this, and the buildings are incredibly beautiful and powerful in all those senses.
Can I jump now to Africa? You're here in Nairobi, and you know, if you look at the population, it's so young. You know, most people you go out have got a smartphone. What are your observations about this continent? You said you'd been here before. Coming from Colombia, coming and seeing what's happening. What are your, you know, you've described a perspective which is like big macro trends. You've taken me over 100, but what are you seeing from your perspective?
Yes, so I would, it would only be appropriate for me to start out modestly. So it's just a person who cares deeply about Africa and the world, and who's been here multiple times, but I am really an outsider. So I am struck deeply by the sense of optimism that I encounter just over the past couple of days, but over seeing people in New York City and elsewhere, and then having visited here before the last election. I'm quite impressed by the degree of optimism. The fact that such a large percentage of the population is under the age of 18 or 20, more than 50%, is a stunning fact. I love young people. That's why in part I'm in education and universities. That can give an enormous vitality to a society and a bigger continent and world. So it poses huge challenges. How do you educate? How do you provide meaningful life opportunities? Colombia would love to be part of thinking through those kinds of problems. That's indeed why we have a global center and centers.
We'd be lucky as Africans to have you thinking.
Well, thank you very much. So we'd be, thrilled to be part of thinking about this, but we would be the first to recognize that we're only a partner in any kind of venture like that. But the main point is that I'm quite impressed by the optimism, because I ask everybody, how do you feel about the future of Kenya, East Africa, Africa?
And you're finding people.
And people finding people, everybody is optimistic.
I know I'm under time constraints, but it's been a really engaging conversation.
Thank you very much.
President Bollinger. I just want to leave, if you can just give us some concluding thoughts about some final thoughts. I loved your passion. I think, you've sold me on a visit to your campus.
Great, fantastic.
And, for the bright folks in Africa, the kids who want to go and get an education abroad, what differentiates you today from other places?
I think there are countless great universities, and I think the attempt to always distinguish we're better than that place is overdone. All that said, of course, I love Columbia, and I am a passionate believer in universities. They are very special places. I mean, these are people who are dedicated to understanding knowledge and pursuing the public good. And, we may get off base at times, but our hearts are in the right place, and certainly our minds are totally dedicated to knowledge. And if you come to Columbia, you will just be overwhelmed by the stimulation of ideas and knowledge. It happens to everybody who is associated with the place. And of course, you're in New York City, and one of the most global of cities, and that's consistent with everything I've said. So it's a wonderful place to visit and a wonderful place to come as a student, and we welcome everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bollinger.